Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 Indiana Farmers Market Forum. I'm Deb Troca, the Executive Director of the Indiana Cooperative Development Center. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I want to remind everyone to please remain muted during the presentations, but we do want your participation, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. At some point during the presentation, towards the end, Christina will, excuse me, drop a link into the chat for the evaluation survey. So please take a few minutes to participate and complete the survey, because we do review all of those as we plan for future forums. So our first session today is Market Managers and Vendors Relationship Building. We have a panel of 4 market managers, and I'll introduce each of them, and then they will proceed with the presentation. We have Barbara Wilder, who has volunteered with the not-for-profit Broad Ripple Farmers Market for 16 years, 13 as market manager. Awesome, Barbara. For the first 6 years, she had the good fortune of being mentored by Ross Ferris, farmer and farmers market entrepreneur who helped establish several farmers markets in Indianapolis. He pioneered the farm-to-table movements in central Indiana by working with restaurants to source from local farms. When Ross passed away in 2011, Barbara carried on his legacy by keeping the market focused on local foods and local food-based entrepreneurs. In 2021, the market had over 75 mostly full-time food or food-related vendors and a customer count of over 3,000 per Saturday during the peak summer months. The outdoor summer market opens the first Saturday in May and closes at the end of October and operates rain or shine. The market is sponsored by the not-for-profit Broad Ripple Village Association and is volunteer operated. Lee Rowan grew up in a small farming community, and her dad was also a small business owner. She started the Fort Wayne Farmers Market in 2012. And it's grown to have employees and at various times managers. She's lucky to have multiple staff now that help and assist the vendors, in growing their businesses. They're very lucky to have several that have moved on to storefronts, so congratulations. With our growth and assistance, they offer, they're now seen as a small business incubator that does a farmers market on Saturdays. To help with the camaraderie, Lee has started a Facebook group for managers called the Indiana Farm Market Managers, and if you haven't joined already, please do so. Jenny Effinger is the market manager at Minnie Tristan Museum and Gardens in Muncie, Indiana, and Delaware County. The market has been around since the early 2000s or late 1990s, depending on who you ask. She's been there for about a year and a half at this point, and is moving into her 3rd outdoor market season and currently managing a 2nd indoor market season. Previously, she founded and managed the Frankton Town Market for 3 years, and although the market is no longer in operation, it was a great learning experience while it lasted. Our final panelist is Nancy Sears Perry, and she's the volunteer market manager of the Yorktown Farmers Marketplace, a farm, food, and artisan market founded in 2008. Because of their incredible vendors, fantastic live music, and activities for all ages, the Yorktown Farmers Marketplace has recently grown from 15 weekly vendors to over 50, with over 100 on their vendor roster. Last season, they were highlighted in Travel Indiana magazine and were voted the #3 market in Indiana and the America's favorite farmers market competition. On Friday evenings, May 19th through September 29th, she'd love to have you visit the Walnut Grove and the beautiful Morrow's Meadow Park to see great things growing in Yorktown. So ladies, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Barbara Wilder with the Broad Ripple Farmers Market, and I think I'm kicking things off. The only thing I guess I should add to my introduction is that we now are a year-round market for maybe 6 or 7 years. I need to confirm that. And I partner with Mark Demerly, who's the manager for the winter segment of our market. And we consist updating from what was presented earlier. We're running again around 3,000 customers per market during the summer, During the winter, we're having a great year this year. We've been 1,000 or more. So we're excited that we're been able to grow the winter market. So that's my pitch for that. What I'd like to do is I tell you how I think about relationships, and then the other market managers can sort of backfill with kind of their approach. I thought I'd start by telling you what I think the basics are, kind of the fundamentals for relationships. And it's kind of the bread and butter stuff that I know we all do, but this is kind of how I do it. I think first is to have very clear market guidelines, expectations for vendors. I don't think you can have a relationship unless you establish those guidelines. Simple things like arrival time, departure time, that's something that we struggle with almost every week, and it requires constant reinforcement. Sort of appearance setup and having attractive displays that add to the market, giving vendors feedback about that, staying on top of product sourcing and being sure that vendors are complying. And then what I call vendor demeanor, we have expectations that our vendors are interacting with customers, that they're smiling and greeting with them and putting on a really good face, again, that adds to the value of the market. So that's kind of what I call market guidelines. Then there's what I call communication. I send out a weekly email to vendors. I know it doesn't get read by most of them, but it does put a reminder out there, and it also prompts vendors to let me know that they maybe didn't plan to be there when they had that planned all along. So it's a useful tool. And then occasionally I want to get information out there. For example, I'll put customer counts in there because that causes some people to open my email, which is very short, by the way, 1 or 2 sentences and a map.
Jumping over to.
Please remember to mute, please.
So I have to sort of back up where I was. Okay, so I send out a weekly email. I think that's probably all I need to say about that. And then I think the other thing that I want to say is the communication piece is I put every vendor's text cell phone number in my phone. So if they're not there timely, or if they're doing something that I need to talk to about, I'm able to call them right away to reinforce that they haven't maybe been compliant with expectations about when to arrive at the market. So I think that immediate feedback, and I do it in a constructive way. If they're late, I say, I hope everything's okay. We're expecting you to be here. And then usually that problem goes away. The other foundation, I think, is promotion. We as a market do a lot of promotion, but we also expect our vendors to do a lot of promotion. And we talk to them about that a lot. Part of it is sharing their posts. The most efficient way we found is sharing their posts and keeping our communications from the market short, because we know that if they get long, they don't get read. So that's kind of the basics to getting things on a, I think, good footing. And then there are 2 other kinds of things I would consider really building what I consider the market family or the market community. And I would start with what I call vendor-to-vendor relationships. And I need to recognize Mike Huppengarner from Caprini, retired from Caprini Creamery, who really pushed this issue last year when we talked about it. And that is the importance of vendors developing relationships among themselves, cross-promoting their products. We as a market can facilitate that by putting them closer together physically, so it's easy for them to cross-refer, and that's worked really well. Those relationships devolve into friendships, and then they help each other cover during bathroom breaks, cover when they have car issues, and so promoting that vendor-to-vendor relationship we think is really important. So when it comes to the market interacting with the vendor and developing good relationships, I think probably the most important thing is to what I call be there. Partly that means being there early, so those vendors know that you know what kind of work goes into what they do. And I think they appreciate your willingness to be there and support them through that process. Same for being there late. So I think not being there, you can't see what you need to see. I think it means knowing your vendors really well, knowing their products, being able to speak about their products. Part of that means doing farm visits, to visit farms, to get to know what those vendors are like in a different setting. We find that vendors are really happy to show off the hard work that they do in those visits. It's not viewed as punitive, it's viewed as validating all the work they do. Part of that being there is making rounds every market. I make the round several times and make sure to talk to vendors so they know I'm there, they know they can ask questions, and just so they're aware that someone's paying attention to what they're doing, for good or bad. And I think my last thing is to enhance vendor relationships, is to make the market fun. There are lots of ways to do that, and lots of markets do different things. But just having things like music to elevate kind of the feel of the market is probably one of the best things you can do. And having things that smell good, like ready-to-eat food. So those are my tips about vendor relationships, and I'm happy to hand it off.
Hi, my name is Lee. I'm with the Fort Wayne Farmers Market. I started back in 2012. I was a vendor here in town and saw a need for a year-round market. And I started with actually just having a winter market. I wasn't planning on having a summer market, and it just kind of happened. And wasn't by any means a plan. None of this was planned. It was just I had an idea and followed through. And you know, when you talk about vendor loyalty, I had about 15 vendors that I typically did a lot of markets with around town. And when I told them what was going on, they willingly followed me into the unknown. And I really credit those vendors, their constant gratitude and the customers' gratitude for us being there, that really made us, you know, have this longevity that we've experienced. And it's really amazing. And that's where, you know, because I had those friendships prior to becoming, you know, the manager of this market, I have a lot of things in common. I can understand what they're saying. If you don't come from a vendor perspective, sometimes you don't understand, and you have to have a variety of conversations so you can develop a well-rounded relationship. About 3 years ago, we started what we call a vendor advisory board to help with the communications. So whenever I plan on an idea to change how we operate or to step up our game, you know, how would this, you know, affect these vendors? And we have one from the farming, one from that's, you know, into plants, so he's natural, you know, one's, you know, a baker, that kind of stuff. So we have all these viewpoints, so to make sure that when I drop that pebble into the pond, that the ripples are minimalized or understood, and everybody's either on board or they give us their viewpoint and we can adapt. And it's really kind of nice that because we're small staff, we can adapt quickly and overcome. You know, we've had some challenges with the COVID, but we marched through it and adapted and did fine. I think it's to have constant conversations, to know how they feel, how things are going on, is important. Unfortunately, I've also had to warn some of the girls that have helped me that some of the vendors, they've just always got a story, and it's never positive, and you can't take it personally. And you have to understand that this is their viewpoint, and sometimes that's just their personality, that they're just always going to be negative or complaining or something like that. And you have to learn to separate yourself from those type of conversations. So when you leave, you're not weighted down by that. You can have some introspect and say, okay, pull out the things that you know you can affect. But on the flip side, you also have to be able to understand that that's just who they are. You know, I had a conversation with an individual, and they wanted me not to invite anybody else that did their product. They wanted to be exclusive. And I had a really difficult time with that conversation because, you know, if you only have one person doing vegetables, one person doing beef, you're going to limit the market. And variety has a lot to do with how successful your market is, because you can have 2 or 3 people having coffee. You know, some people prefer this guy's coffee, some people prefer this guy's coffee, and that's okay. And they just didn't understand that you can't have exclusion in a small market. And I never had that before, and I don't know if any of the other ladies have had that experience or not, but that was I would say at least a very interesting conversation to hear their viewpoint, how they should be the only one selling this product and everybody else shouldn't. We do layout by seniority, and we used to just pick a layout, but then to reward the people who'd been there the longest with us, we let them choose their spot and do a layout that works, because that, I know some, like when you do a big show, like when I used to do big events, if you bought this corner, you paid more because it was a prime spot kind of thing. So instead of charging them more, I did it on a seniority. So the longer you're with us, the more seniority you got. And this last indoor season was kind of a challenge, because somebody who had just started with the market saw another vendor spot and said, well, I like their spot better. I need to have it because, I can be a bigger business. I can be more popular than them. And so we had to gingerly try to explain that to them, that, we do base our layout on seniority. And one of these days, if you stay with us, then you'll be a senior vendor, be able to pick your spots as well. They weren't happy with that. And it's really unfortunate, because I think they do have some potential, but they've decided to quit our market because we didn't give them preferential treatment. And it's very frustrating, because they don't see the overall picture or our overall mission. And they just were inconsolable on, how we reward people for their, duration with us by choosing their spot. And the spot he wanted was a chosen spot. And all the other spots he mentioned were all senior vendors who had chosen their spot. So it was, it didn't end well, but that is definitely their choice. And we were sad to see him go, but we just have to move forward. But I would definitely say, if you have a system, you need to stick with that system and not do special treatment for anybody. Something we did about 2 or 3 years ago, we've always, some of the stuff is new, but some of the stuff we've done since the beginning. We have what we call emergency contact list. I was at a small market when we first moved to Fort Wayne, and somebody had a medical emergency. They couldn't unlock the guy's phone. They knew his name, but they didn't know who was important. And so we actually have an emergency contact list. And so when we get people's applications, that's one of those things is, part of their paperwork that they do with us is, who do you want us to contact? Please don't put down another employee that's there with you every Saturday. Put down somebody who's not there, or somebody who we should contact if you have a medical emergency. I just feel like it's always important, because a lot of times that person, but you don't necessarily know their spouse or their kids, or who to contact, to let them know that something has happened. Something new we've added is on our application, we have people list what they're certified in: CPR, first aid, things of that nature, because about 3 years ago, we bought a trailer that has a generator and an air conditioner, and like a little office setup. And so we can have what we call a cooling station. So if somebody gets really hot at the summer markets, they can come in, sit down, get cooled off, have water, those kind of things. We have a small first aid kit, that kind of stuff. And again, in case there is a medical emergency, all the staff have access to who is trained in these things off of their application. So it's just really important to make sure that since you are bringing people to the market, that you understand that you take responsibility for those people. When I moved outdoors for the first year, and from every year afterwards, I would meet with the emergency management people from Fort Wayne. And the reason why is because, okay, if there's a hurricane, a big storm, things of that nature, not only do you have to worry about your vendors, you need to worry about the people who are attending, and where do you need to direct them to? And then to work with the vendors to know where they need to go and where they need to be directed to. You can, lower the tents, that kind of stuff, but at a certain point, if you're not safe outdoors, you're not safe outdoors. So I think it's important to not only plan for good days with the vendors, but you also need to plan for the what ifs. And luckily, we've never had a medical emergency per se, since where we had to call their loved ones or anything. Last year, I think it was, we had a girl that was at a food truck and ordering food, and her eyes went back in her head, and she just literally fell over. I mean, like in a split second. And by the time the vendor's partner could get up to us at the food truck, they'd called 911. And when we moved to the park, the first fire station is literally like a half mile away. So by the time I could actually get down to the person that had fell over, because they were, at the end of the park, by the time I got there, the fire department was already there. It was that quick. They were there that quick. So we were very blessed. She would end up being fine. But again, it was just heat exhaustion. So again, it's just, having some resources available and having people know what they should and shouldn't do I think is really critical. I think that's about all I got for you. So I will pass this off to Jenny, I think is next.
I was taking notes. That was really good. Because we have our annual meeting. So that was one of the things we do. We do an annual vendor meeting. I last year gave vendors incentives to come to the annual meeting. So since we're operated through a museum, they got free passes if they were a paid vendor by the time that we had our meeting and they showed up, obviously. So reviewing the emergency protocols, I think would be really helpful at the meeting as well, just so that everyone's on the same page for like an incident like that, because that's something I hadn't thought about. But yeah, going back, I'm Jenny. I work at Minnetrista. This is technically my third outdoor farmers market season with them, but I've only been there for 1.5 years. So you do that math. Like I started at the very end of the season when I started, and we're going into the third season now. So one of the things that I found is that a lot of the vendors had been there, obviously longer than me when I started, but a long time, like 15 plus years. And when you get a group like that, they tend to have a very specific way that they want the market to go. And it is difficult. You kind of have to ease into it and sort of listen for the first season or two, because we had an indoor market season right after I started. So you just kind of have to listen and then implement. Hello? Oh, okay. So I did a lot of listening when I first started, and we made small tweaks, and now we're getting into, there was a lot of turnover before I started. So I don't think that a lot of the bigger issues had been addressed for like quite some time. So we're getting into now like where we see it going in the next, 5 years or so. Vendor demeanor, I thought that was a really interesting thing. We call it the code of conduct. I noticed when I first started, like, I can't remember who said it. Vendors sometimes some of them just have a story, no matter what. Like I was getting a lot of, well, it's really slow today, right at 8 a.m. And I'm like, okay, let's give it at least an hour. Okay. So the vendor code of conduct was something that we kind of added, just in case it doesn't let up. Like if I've been there for now going on 3 seasons and we still have some vendors that are repeatedly being caught, or not caught, observed, speaking negatively about the market in the past, because there's nothing, if they have a rightful grievance now, then that's something that we can discuss. Although I don't discuss things during market hours, I usually tell them to send me an email or call me after. So it gives them time to kind of relax about it. And then we're not going back and forth. It's a much more calm and reasonable conversation, I have found, if you give them time to kind of cool off before you talk about it. But yeah, there were just some vendors who would not be content no matter what you did. And so I did add a code of conduct so that guests are not overhearing you talk about things that happened 10 years ago. Guests don't want to hear about that. They're there to have a good time. So that was one of the big things when I first started. And then obviously the regulations, just being consistent across the board, is a big thing. We have everything in our regulations that apply to all events at Minnetrista. So I manage other events as well as the farmers market. So that's like things like tent weights that wasn't required before. And it is so important to have tent weights. They may not do a whole lot, but at least they slow down the projectile. We had a storm this last summer and it literally came out of nowhere, and tents were folded in half even after they had weights on them. So I can't imagine if we had, 38 vendors in the parking lot, where these would end up if they didn't have tent weights. We also have a vendor group. I don't use it a lot. I just share mainly posts that Minnetrista makes on their Facebook page. I'll share to the group so that everyone's aware if they don't follow. But I really try to only communicate via email, mostly so that I have notes of what I have said. Every single time I send it, I can look back and say, you were informed, or, maybe I missed something or whatever. I have a clear trail of all of the communication. Then in person, if we're making a big change or something like that, I usually try to kind of feel it out with the vendors who have been there the longest. I call them oldie but goodie vendors. They sometimes have information that I don't. So going back probably 5 years, everything was done in a manila folder, like with a Word document. So sometimes it's very difficult to find information on what has happened at the market before me. So like, for example, if I'm thinking of changing the market hours because the vendors are consistently complaining that they're slow from 8 to 9 and the weather is too cold and whatever, then I'll feel it out with a couple of the vendors who have been there for a long time first. And then at the end of the season, I also send out a survey, so a post-season survey, and it gives them a chance to kind of rant about whatever collective thoughts they have for the whole season. And then if they bring it up again the next year, I can say, did you submit your survey? Because I can't use the information if I don't have it. So it kind of covers my butt in a way, saying like, I gave you a shot to say what you wanted to say and you didn't say anything. So, but I send out an event survey in general. It just says like, how do you feel about the market and this, promotions, management, payment processes, all of that stuff. Then this year I also sent a separate survey that was like, if you could choose the hours, what would they be? So we did get quite a bit of feedback and we did change the hours because of it, but I needed it on paper first. I can't just take your word for it. What else? We sent out thank you cards after the season last year to all of the vendors. So we use Farm Spread, which is a game changer. If you don't, you should. It's totally worth the investment. It saves me 1 million hours. I guarantee it. There's a way for you to email the vendors who have signed up for any specific date, or all of the vendors that are signed up for any of your events across the board, or any of the vendors. Or any of the vendors who have signed up just specifically for like the outdoor market. Yes, it's a market management system. It's a platform that's on the internet, and you do pay for it, but I have found that by charging our application fee, it covers the cost. So they charge by booth space and not by vendor application or applicant. So if you have, I don't know, I think that we have a maximum of like 70 available booth spaces total. They only charge you for the ones that you've actually rented during that season. So they average it out, I guess, for the whole season. And if we had around 40 or 50 used each day, they would charge you for that. It's just farmspread.com. But if you want to email them, it would be support@farmspread.com, because you will have to sign a contract. Manage My Market is good too. Manage My Market they charged per accepted vendor. And sometimes I accept a vendor who doesn't actually pay a vendor fee. For example, like my not-for-profits are also on FarmSpread. My musicians are on FarmSpread. We don't charge them. So I would be charged $15 for each of those vendors if they're accepted, like if they're an approved vendor. But I don't get any money from them at all. Like I don't think we even require them to pay an application fee. So that's just the main, well, it's not the main difference, but FarmSpread also does a lot of analyticals and stuff too. But anyways, so the layout was something that was brought up. I actually completely changed the layout last year. There were some vendors who had been there for a very long time, and I was noticing that the guests we're very used to those vendors being in the same space, which is great, but also it's unfair for the new vendors. We grew quite a bit last year. I think it was around 30%. And I noticed that the year before, when I started at the end of this season, the new vendors were kind of placed like off to the side in this new area that they had just recently incorporated into the market. And the guests just did not go over there. So the vendors, yes, they complained about it, but also I noticed the same thing. The guests didn't go over there because they were so used to their same route. So I did move the vendors around quite a bit, and I moved some of the vendors who had been in the same spot for a long time. But I pitched it to them first. I called them individually. I made sure that they understood where my head was at. And I told them just to give me a season and see how it goes. A couple of them, I told them, if you come back, you can come back for a month and then let me know, because they were so mad when I first started that they were just ready to pick up and leave. And they all stayed. So sometimes you just have to kind of ask for faith, I guess, and explain it as best as you can and have like an airtight explanation for them. And I thought I made notes. So the emergency contact thing was really great. I'm going to add that to our applications because they are hopefully going out Friday. Oh, and our vendor fees are due in advance. So I don't collect payments on the day of. There's too much going on, and sometimes you forget. We all know how it goes. The market goes by really quickly. So everything is due upfront. FarmSpread, you can invoice them through FarmSpread and actually see which invoices have been paid, and then I can remove them, and that new layout will be active immediately. So there's no reprinting the layout or any of that stuff. I just get on my phone and I can access it instantly. So if their fees are not due, I send them a notice like that Thursday before. Usually if it's a vendor fee and it's an oversight or something like that, I'll print the invoice and give it to them at market so that they know, I know. And then if they still haven't paid it by that following Thursday, because we're a Saturday morning market, I'll email them and say, you've been removed from the layout. When you get this paid, I'll add you back. Because you can't go through the season without paying your vendor fee or whatever fee it is. That's insane. But there was just a lot of maintenance and cleanup whenever I first started, just like really basic things. And I've noticed that consistency is just the number one thing, because the vendors, this is their whole world, most of them. So if you misspeak or if you're not consistent, they notice way faster than you do. So you just need to have some really like airtight regulations and wrap your head around it so that it makes sense to you, so that you're consistent every single time. And I think that's it. Oh, we do have, okay, so if they fail to follow the regulations, I usually will mention it in an email and just say, hey, I noticed that you were late, or I noticed that you had a no call, no show. If it happens again, you'll be placed on probation, which means that another time you can be asked to leave the market for the remainder of the season. That also hurts your chances of being approved for other Minnetrista events, because a lot of our vendors participate in other events as well. So I have had to place people on probation, and it is a wake up call, and they don't do it again. So I just have a list, like literally an Excel spreadsheet, and I write down, I think it's a Word document actually. I write down what the offense was, the date that I noticed it, if they've been given a warning, and then I write down if they've been placed on probation, what date that is, and it doesn't end until the very end of the market season, which is whatever date. So it's easy to keep track of that. As many documents as you can make ahead of time, it's so much better. Like I have documents for SNAP token, like when I collect SNAP, for example, I have them write down how many they've given me. I then count them in front of them, and I have them sign off on it so that there's no confusion. Before, people were just handing me bags with business cards in them, and there was no confirmation that what they counted was actually what I received. And it was really messy. So just as many papers and clipboards as you can have ready in advance, because market goes by so fast on the day of. I found that to be really helpful. Okay, now that I think is it.
Gina has a good question in regard to vehicles. Jenny, do you require your vendors to move their vehicles prior to the market?
Yes and no. So technically they're supposed to be done setting up 15 minutes prior. I'm not, I will admit, I am not crazy OCD about that. But you cannot have vehicles on the lot. You cannot be moving vehicles around when the guests are there. So if your car is moved and you're still like fiddling with your table, it's fine for now, just because there was so much other maintenance when I first started. We do rent vehicle spaces, but there was some confusion with that as well. Some vendors were parking their vehicle next to their space. Some vehicles were within the space with the tent behind it. So this year I clarified it. You rent your booth space, and that's 10 by 10, 10 by 20, 10 by 30, whatever. And then you can add the amenity of leaving your vehicle in your space if you want to. But that also restricts where I can place you on the layout, because we only have so many spaces that will accommodate that depth. Like for example, if you're right up next to a sidewalk, you can't put your vehicle behind that. So it would have to be next to or adjacent. And then now you're taking up 50 feet. So you're gonna be in the Orchard Shop parking lot, which is 1/2 of the market if you choose to rent vehicle space. But otherwise, we did add this year that vendors are supposed to be parking in the designated areas, which I send out in an email every week. It's a reminder, this is where vendors park. And this is what time you set up, this is what time you break down every week. So this year they will be fined if I find them parking in the main parking lot, because guests have complained enough about not finding parking, and that makes everyone miss out. Like if our guests are telling me that they're leaving because they couldn't find a parking spot and they'll just return the next week, everyone misses out on that sale. So there will be penalties this year for it, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I'm next up. I'm Nancy Sears Perry, and I'm the market manager of the Yorktown Farmers Marketplace. Like Jenny, we are also located in Delaware County. And something that Jenny and I have done as two markets within the same county is we've done a lot of behind the scenes work together in figuring out a tool we could use that would be beneficial to our vendors. And one of those things is market spread, farm spread, and I'll talk about that later in my points. One of the first things we do at the Yorktown Farmers Market is every week, I'm there early. The market starts at 4:30. I am on site in the Walnut Grove at the latest at 12:30 to set up. We're in a walnut grove, so that's always sticks and walnuts and all kinds of things to take care of in nature so that we have a safe environment for vendors and customers. So I am there early and I'm able to greet vendors by name. They'll usually shoot me a text if they're down at the other end of the Walnut Grove and say, hey, I'm here. And then if they haven't checked in Farm Spread, then I check them in. We also, throughout the evening, I go around, I have a counterpart named Jeff. He's one of the other market managers. He goes around and talks to all the vendors. So they get FaceTime with market managers multiple times throughout the evening. We also have a fun position. My father loves attending the farmers market. And if you've ever met him, he is a very social man. And we now call him the mayor of the market. And the mayor goes around and he gets to know the vendors. And they feel so comfortable talking to him about all kinds of things. Life, being a vendor, anything. And so we just really value having that volunteer who goes around and acts as mayor. And we're in a little small town. Yorktown is population 11,000. So everybody knows the mayor anyway, even though there's not an elected mayor in our town. He is our mayor of the market. And the vendors even call him Mr. Mayor. So it's kind of fun. Another thing we do is we introduce vendors to other markets to other vendors. So we create pods within our market. We are a farm, food, and artisan market. So we create pods so that vendors can get to know each other. They can partner with each other. They can cross-promote. We believe strongly in that cross-pollination that can happen between vendors. So we had one vendor recently this past year. Well, she's had 2 years at the market. The first year, she was just going to try it out for 4 weeks. So she tried it out, loved it, and ended up being there the entire season. Last year, her business had grown so much that, great question. I'll explain the pod. The pod is, we put similar vendors together. For example, we have a boutique pod. So we have 5 vendors in one area of the market. They are all boutique style items. One has t-shirts, one is homegrown or homemade earrings. Somebody else makes, it's all edible, but it's care products, skincare products. So, and then we have another woodworking pod where we have somebody who turns their own bowls, who makes their own toys. We have 4 vendors in a woodworking pod. And I tell you, if you want any problem in the world solved, submit it to the woodworking pod and they will be right on it. One of the vendors in the woodworking pod, he actually helped us build out our new market trailer and just loved being able to donate his time. We paid for all the resources, but he donated his time in building out what we needed. So that is how we define a pod. But that one vendor I was telling you about, she continued to grow. She now has a storefront, and within her storefront, she has a market vendor room. And so she features other artisans within her storefront. And that's just been a nice relationship that we feel proud that has been facilitated by the farmers market.
How many is in these market vendors?
Pardon me? Rebecca, I think you're not muted. Did you have a question?
Yeah, how many vendors do you have?
We have right now on any given week, we have 45 to 60 vendors, 60. On a light week, we have 45 vendors. On a busy week, we've had as many as 62. So we introduce them to each other. Then the third thing we do is we connect them with other markets. And that is really easy to do through Farm Spread. Because, well, first of all, Jenny and I, we are within 10 miles of each other. We are on Friday evenings. They are on Saturday mornings. So we don't compete with each other. So we as markets are able to cross-pollinate, and we are able to share great vendors with each other. But then I also try to know where vendors might be, where they might live if they don't live in our community, and refer them to markets in their area. For example, the Broad Ripple Farmers Market has benefited from one of our vendors who started at Yorktown, and that's the Cookie Jar Crew. And if you've ever had their cookies, you will understand why we love them so much, and we are glad they're doing so well at Broad Ripple. And she also just started with us to get her feet wet, and then has just really gone gangbusters with her business. And she's a wonderful vendor to work with. So we like to cross-pollinate with other markets. And on Farm Spread, once you fill out a vendor profile, and you can put on there the mile radius you are willing to travel, and then you see other markets within your radius to apply to. So several of our vendors have used that tool. It's great for their business. And we, like Jenny at Minnetrista, we transfer the cost to the vendor. So any vendor who applies has a $10 application fee that we don't review their application until they've paid that fee. And so that takes care of the cost of using this fabulous resource. And Jenny and I went through training together as well, Market Spread / Farm Spread. They're both the same. They will do training. And so we felt it was important. We train together, and then we try to keep our messaging the same between the two markets. And then we collaborate on our application as well, so that since we are within the same county, we are consistent with what we are asking them to submit to us for review. We also like to connect our vendors with other resources, Indiana Grown, the Indiana Farmers Market, Community of Practice, the health department. We love referring them to our connections at our local health department when they have questions that we can't answer, and we have a very strong relationship with our local health department. We also value their opinion and do submit a survey, give them a survey, and give them an opportunity to share what they feel has gone well, so that we know, hey, what we are doing is working, but then we also give them an opportunity for that constructive feedback and value what they have to say. We also put an economic piece in there so they can voluntarily tell us about their sales. I also am an elected town official, and so I love having that economic development piece so that we can position ourselves for some grant monies, because we are a small business incubator and we have grown into some storefront businesses. So for us, that's a really valuable piece. And then we do all we can to attract an audience so they can grow, attract customers. We have car shows a few times during the season. We have a young entrepreneur program, so that gets a younger audience, and the community comes out in mass to buy from our adorable young entrepreneurs. We have live music. We have a petting zoo. A local farm will bring their farm animals. And they do that a few times during the summer. So kids love that. And so then that gets a new audience into the market. And then we also have a food truck there so that somebody can come for dinner. We have an area, a food court set up where people can come for dinner, enjoy music, and do their Friday night shopping. That's all I have.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies. There's a couple of questions in here that I wanted to bring up. And Anna, I'm not sure if your question to Jenny had been answered adequately. She was asking for elaboration on the code of conduct. Do you still need additional information on that? All good. Okay, got it.
I see that Anne has a question in regard to, have we always been our size? And no, when I was a vendor at the Yorktown Farmers Marketplace, and Jenny was a vendor there as well for a few years. When I was a vendor, a very busy week was when we had 15 vendors. That was a busy week. I'm not sure how and why we grew, other than we really made an effort to use Canva. It's a beautiful resource, but we use Canva, we step up our promotions. We've tried to unify the graphics that we use and get the word out on social media, ask people to share, promote our applications through social media, through a website that we developed, and then just going out and doing some of those marketing things. So honestly, word of mouth grew, and I think we grew a lot due to the pandemic, because we had a lot of people in the area transitioning from working somewhere in an office to maybe having more time to pursue a passion. And we noticed a lot of small women-owned businesses wanting to get their feet wet in, just test the waters, and the market was the perfect place for that. Our fees are low. Our fees are really low. And I think that was very attractive to people wanting to explore a business opportunity.
Nancy doesn't do herself justice here, because it's not like it's just using Canva. Like, their social media went from like little interaction to a ton of interaction. They post constantly. It is vibrant. It is exciting. I think you need to make everyone know that, like, this is the new vibe, and then they also get excited. But you've also added more consistent music, other events, community engagement, a lot.
I want to talk about
Not just Canva, but Canva's great.
Yes, it is Yeah, it is great. Great tool.
I'd like to add, as far as, with marketing, there's a fine line with marketing, because I find that a lot of vendors misinterpret the market's role in marketing. I've had a lot of vendors who get upset because we're not marketing them. Well, when you have, 60 plus vendors, you can't market everyone, and they need to understand the role of the market is to let everybody know that there's a market going on, but
Yes.
not specific vendors, and that, you're not in charge of marketing each individual business. That's not what the fees are for. So it's communications and hitting that expectation. And then through all that, like, we have somebody that just manages our social media. They're on our payroll, and, we send them pictures and everything, but she has to keep track to make sure on social media that everybody is featured, but we don't call out that specific vendor's name or anything, because to try to avoid favoritism, or the perception of favoritism from the market. And then finding other vendors, you talk about the cross-pollination. I think that's a very great concept, because I'm more opposed to market cannibalism, because when we find a good vendor, we just say, when you're ready to grow and you have a way to do a second setup, why don't you come look at the Fort Wayne market and join us? Because I understand that in small towns like, Yorktown and things of that nature, that to remove somebody from their market leaves a hole. And so if you're growing where you're going to have a second setup and you're able to produce enough to do a second market on Saturday, we would like for you to join us. But it's market cannibalism, I think, is a really sad part of markets, is because when you're trying to fill a hole at your market and you go out and recruit from other markets, you need to make sure that you do it ethically and represent your market with those ethics.
That's a good point. I saw several people come. I don't even know who they were, but they came to my market last year and were handing out flyers for their events, which also happen on Saturday. And I feel like if I were going to go to Yorktown and talk to the vendors, I would say, hey, Nancy, is it cool if I come and speak to your vendors? I would not just show up unannounced with handouts and start to poach vendors or attempt to poach vendors, you know.
It is, unfortunately, it is a part of market. Because you have successful vendors, people want that at their market, which I understand, but there's a right way and a wrong way of doing it. And unfortunately, the wrong way is has been rampant, and I think that's why I started the Indiana vendor group, on Facebook, is so the managers could talk to each other, and if they have a need, say, hey, I've got a need, you have somebody who can produce or have a second setup, on Saturday, if that's the day of your market, that kind of thing. Because there are a lot of vendors that have uncles or wives or whatever that run a second operation at a different location, and I think that's great, but you just need to be respectful for that current market.
Are there any other questions? We've got a couple of minutes left.
One thing we do is we invite to our vendor meeting at Yorktown, because we are so close to Minnetrista. We invite Jenny, and we did this with the previous market manager. We invite them to our vendor meeting so that they know the face of a neighboring market that we're not in competition with. We hope they can come to Friday and Saturday both. Honestly, I know Friday night is a real pain for some vendors, especially if they're up at the crack of dawn for a Saturday market. So I absolutely respect if people can't come to us. And there are a lot of great vendors that are at Jenny's market that can't come to mine. And I absolutely respect that. And I encourage that wise decision-making on their part, because it is about their business. And if they can work Friday night in, we love it. We love when they're here. As far as mapping the market, what we do, Krista, is FarmSpread has that tool where
It's so good.
it is so fabulous.
So good.
Mapping was my nightmare until we started using FarmSpread, MarketSpread, because they will work with you. FarmSpread will help you with your map, or you can create the map, which I think is what Jenny and I did. And then
I had them do it.
you
I
had
didn't
them
figure
do
it.
it.
Did you figure it out on your own?
Well, yes, but I should
I
have
didn't
them
do
do
that.
it. It was the pain.
Yeah, I didn't do that.
That's great. They are wonderful at MarketSpread. Their customer service is great, but they will. So you do your map, we did ours, and we labeled them, we had our numbering system. Well, then on our chart for each week, we would put in, you can assign, let's say it's spot D2. Well, then it populates, it will ask you what weeks will they be in spot D2? And then your map is done for this season. And that has been a game changer for us. Then you can take that, there's a widget that you copy and you paste into your website. So customers can click on that map. They can see what vendors will be there that week and where they are located on the map. If people use your website. People
You can
also
make a QR code too, because I did that.
Yes, yeah. So you can, it's so user friendly for those of us on the back end of it and those who are using the tool as a vendor and a customer. I really am a advocate for that tool.
Last year, Nancy and I cried a little several times trying to figure it out because it is so like all encompassing. There's just so much to learn all at one time, and we needed to get our apps done like yesterday. But now that we've been using it, I can't imagine how you would keep track of anything without it. It would, the labor is just.
Yeah. It's great.
Well, ladies, we are at time. Thank you all for participating in this panel. Some awesome ideas about working with your vendors and creating positive relationships. And I'm sure they'd be willing to answer additional questions should you have those. So you could always pop those into the chat and we can get those answered for you at a later date. So Christina, next steps.
We are taking a 15-minute break, and next up will be Cat Fields White. So we'll be starting at 11:15. So thank you all for joining.